Now, the last thing that I want to talk to you about is a statute that is specifically applicable to the military. Most of the ones we've talked about so far, other than the Military Lending Act, have been statutes of general application. They apply to all people in society at some level. Maybe they have some particular provisions that relate to military people, or that there can be comment upon that's pertinent especially to military people. But this act that I'm going to talk about now is really only about military people, and that is the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act. You might have heard of an older statute known as the Soldiers and Sailors Civil Relief Act. This is pretty much the same thing. The Servicemembers Civil Relief Act is really just the modern version of the Soldiers and Sailors Civil Relief Act. The current version of the law was first passed in 2003. There have been some amendments to it over time, even as you go back in time, all the way back to the War of 1812. There have been various laws on the books that have tried in ways to protect military members when they are engaged in a period of active duty, deployed, particularly in wartime, for the services of their country. So if you're going to go on employment, or if you're on a period of active duty, then some of these provisions may apply to you. Now, most of the Act requires some particular action on behalf of the military member. By that I mean you can't necessarily be passive about your rights. In many instances under the Act, you have to pursue your rights by taking some action. There is an active duty requirement for many aspects of the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act, which means that you've got to be on an active duty status. And there also is a standard they call the materially affected standard, which means that your period of active duty has to have some effect on your abilities. Let's talk about some specific provisions that exist in the Act. I could talk for probably 3 or 4 hours about all of the different things that are available to you in the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act. I'm going to talk about some of the more commonly used provisions, but there are any number of services available to you. You can certainly get a lot of this information off of Department of Defense websites. You can get information about your rights at the local JAG office, at your installation. There are books that have been written on the subject that you can buy in the marketplace. Probably the most popular provision of all, and maybe the most well-known provision, is the 6% cap on interest. If you have a loan and you are going to be on a period of active duty, you can apply to have the 6% cap put into place for your period of active duty. And you can apply this to really many kinds of loans. You can apply it to automobile loans, for example. You might actually effectively reduce your interest rate. So people kind of like that. It's a very popular position, one that's used. I also probably should mention the applicability of this act goes to active duty and reserve and guard. The real key here is that you're on active duty during your period of application. So like we talked about it before, it may not apply to a reservist when you're in a civilian capacity, but when you're on orders or going on a period of deployment, this act will have some effect for you. One of those things that might be affected is a stay of legal proceedings. The stay provision really can apply to almost any kind of legal proceeding, whether it be before a court, whether it be before an administrative body of some kind. It applies in any state, federal or state, or even the territories of the United States. If you are called to account in one way or another in a legal proceeding, perhaps it's over a debt, could be over a divorce, could be over really almost anything, you can apply to the court for a stay. What does that mean? That means that you can stop the legal proceeding from going forward in your absence. So if you're going to be, for example, overseas in the desert for a 6-month period of time, it may well be that a judge would issue an order saying, we will not do anything in this lawsuit until the military member gets back and can respond to the allegations or the claims or the issues in the case. It doesn't mean that you can use this act for nefarious purposes. There are actually remedies that the judge can employ against you if you try to use the act for your own bad purposes. But for legitimate purposes, you can seek a stay of the court proceeding by simply applying to the court, stating that you're going to be on a period of orders. Maybe providing a copy of your orders would be a good idea. Convince the court that you are in fact in the military, and they will generally issue the stay until you get back. Another provision of the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act that is beneficial is the ability to reinstate insurance policies, particularly life and health insurance policies. If you're paying, for example, a monthly premium on those policies, but during a period of deployment, those don't get paid, maybe it's an error of some kind, you come back and you find out, uh-oh, the policy has lapsed, they're no longer providing coverage, you can cite to the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act, you can back pay the premiums that were owed, and under these provisions, within a certain period of time, if you do this all soon enough, different timelines apply depending on what you're talking about, but if you do it soon enough, you can get your policy reinstated. Some other provisions relate to termination of contracts. If you are going to be deployed or go on a period of active duty, you can terminate a lease. A lot of times over history, some of the leases, especially in areas that have military installations, there has been a common provision in some of the leases known as the military clause. Even though, for example, you might sign a lease that lasts for a year, upon orders and a proper notification to the lessor, you can get out of that lease. You can leave it sooner than you had contracted for. Well, what the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act does is it takes that military clause that has sometimes existed in some lease contracts and it makes it a matter of federal law. Whether a military clause exists in your lease or not, as a matter of fact, as a matter of paper and ink, it actually does exist as a matter of law. It exists in the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act, and you can use that to have an escape hatch, a termination essentially, from your lease. Similarly, there are provisions that allow you to get out of an automobile lease. Now, this is an area, again, as I mentioned before, with a materially affected standard. You need to show that your period of active duty is going to materially affect your ability to pay on the automobile lease. But there are situations where it would certainly make sense to get out of that lease, and you can use the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act to do that. There are some state adjuncts to the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act, and by that what I mean is some of the states around the country have passed laws of their own that apply at the state level to provide similar protections. Some of them simply repeat the protections that are in place with the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act, and it provides some additional foundation for your rights there. But some of the acts will provide you with some additional protections as well. An example of this is Illinois' Patriot Act. One of the things that's being debated with respect to the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act is that some people think that one of the future amendments to the act is going to add cell phone contracts as one of the types of contracts from which you can get a termination. Well, if you happen to be an Illinois resident, that already exists because it exists in the Illinois Patriot Act. So when you look at Servicemembers Civil Relief Act issues, you want to take care to make sure you also look at your state law to see if they have any additional protections for you. It's been a very enjoyable time speaking with you today, and I wish all of you the best in terms of managing your debt and finances, and we hope that this presentation has been of some use to you in that regard.